Hi again then guys, and welcome to not only the 48th episode of Weekend Warriors, but a very significant episode of Weekend Warriors, because as of course you'll have seen from the title of the video, this is a major landmark in the Gran Turismo tuning and review series for this channel. This is the first official review, a specific car review that is, which we're going to be doing for GT Sport. And we are going to be doing some others as well down the line. Now this particular vehicle is of course not featured currently on Gran Turismo. It's a new car for GT Sport, the 2014 shape Audi TTS Quattro. So in some ways this review is going to be a little bit different to many of our others. For one thing, of course, most of you guys have no point of reference as far as how the car compares to existing vehicles because the game isn't fully out yet. Plus, we cannot upgrade the cars in the same way that we would on GT6, GT5, GT4, all of those games. So the specs are going to be a little bit different. They may sound a little bit underwhelming compared to some of the other cars which we talk about, because of course on GT6, the TTS which we have on that game is running over 500 horsepower. It's around a 235 mph machine with great acceleration, etc. This one, on the other hand, is kind of tame in comparison. It's a great performance car, but it just doesn't have that level of tuning capability. So the question is, what do you get from the car? Well, of course, there is no PP level on the game. It's an N300 class vehicle, which is basically road cars with around 300 to 350 horsepower. And it has between those power levels. If you increase the power level on the game, which you can a little bit, you can put out 333 horsepower. It also puts out 305 foot-pounds of torque, and that's partially due to the fact that it is a turbocharged engine. Now, the engine on this car is only a 2 litre, which is significantly smaller than you would have had on a TT Quattro back in the day, to be producing that kind of power and torque. And thanks to the fact that also it is a turbo, you produce that torque pretty low. 2000 RPM for peak torque is pretty impressive, and that of course means that you don't really have to work the engine that hard, even though it is a smaller capacity than you typically expect from a performance TT range model like this one. You'd probably assume a 3 litre or 3.2, that kind of thing, but no, it's much, much smaller than that. Now, as far as weight, we don't have a weight loss package to apply to the car, of course, but it weighs 1,357 kilos, which actually isn't that bad. You can make it a little bit lighter, and as such, for an all-wheel drive car with a well-equipped interior, and without the major tuning upgrades of GT5 or GT6, that's actually not a bad number to be working with. You're putting out 245 horsepower per tonne with those numbers, and of course the car doesn't have a price at the moment. You don't buy vehicles on GT Sport as yet. We don't really know whether or not you'll buy cars on the real game, or whether you'll progress through a career mode of winning them instead. Maybe you'll just unlock new vehicles rather than buying them, in a similar way to games like Drive Club. I personally think that's an interesting way of doing it. Unlocking vehicles is something which I definitely miss on the world of Gran Turismo, but at the same time, it would be nice to have a mix of both. Maybe that you can buy cars, but certain ones do have to be unlocked, or maybe you have the option of either. You can pay out the cash if you want to, but if you don't want to, you could just wait and win it instead. Ultimately, we'll have to wait and see, and for the moment at least, it has no price tag to work with. I won this car relatively early on in the GT Sport beta, and it's a pretty good car. It's not necessarily as strong as the 2014 Impreza or the Mitsubishi Evo 10 in that particular N300 class. It's not necessarily bad compared to those two, but it's not quite as quick nonetheless. It's still a great car to drive though. As far as the audio of the vehicle, it's not overly loud. It has quite a muffled tone. That's not necessarily going to be to everyone's liking, but again, many modern performance cars, especially ones with uprated efficiency in terms of engine technology, are quieter. That's just the way it is these days. So overall, it's not really letting you down in that way, and again, if you do end up being able to upgrade it, that may well change. Now, as far as this car's ability, what it's like to drive, the performance that you can get, well, of course, in the N300 class, vehicles are designed to be as equal as possible within realistic limitations. Obviously you don't want them to be exactly the same, because that just wouldn't be accurate. Having a TT Quattro exactly equal to an Impreza and an Evo 10 and a Lotus Evora in those classes just would not be accurate to real life, but you're looking in the same kind of performance range, and that's the whole point. As far as how the car drives, how it performs, it feels a little bit heavier on its feet than the Impreza, for instance, or the Evo. I don't know about the Evora, I haven't compared it to that car, I don't own it yet. And as far as other N300 vehicles, again, I don't know. As far as how it compares currently to, say, GT5 or GT6, to the TT 3.2 Quattro or the TTS, as we said, it doesn't have those kind of tuning levels. But at the same time, if you compare it to a TTS with a similar level of tune on GT6, how does it compare then? Well, the handling is different, of course, obviously, on GT Sport, but the way that it compares feels similar. The TTS is already a great performance car on Gran Turismo 6. I've talked about that car in a number of countdown lists. I consider it to be one of the best all-round all-wheel drive cars in the game, and one of the best sports cars or sports coupes on GT6 as well. It's not the strongest in a straight line, or the fastest around a track, or even the best value for the price, but it does have a very strong all-round mix of all of those things put together, and it still feels like it's going to be a car which, at least to some degree, has that. Obviously the tuning will limit that ability and how good it can feel, so you're not going to be looking at 235, 240 miles per hour out of it anytime soon. But in comparison to those other N300 cars, although it may not always be as quick as some of them, it's still competitive, and I would say it's maybe a little bit more fun than some of them. The Impreza, for instance, is one of the best N300 cars, as is the Mitsubishi Evo 10, but I personally feel that cars like that, not necessarily just those, but some others as well, be it Japanese cars or even German cars as well, can sometimes be very fast, but not necessarily have as much passion behind them or as much charisma. The TT Quattro, I feel, has a little bit more of that. Now, unfortunately, high performance and charisma don't necessarily blend that well, because the things that make a car passionate to drive aren't necessarily things that make it fast, such as getting the tail out, for instance, around corners. It feels great and looks great, but it's not as quick. Overall then, I think that those who do like the TT already are going to be very happy with this update to the vehicle on GT Sport. And that's it for our first ever Gran Turismo Sport dedicated car review. But that's it overall for this particular episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.